Puedes empezar tranquilamente.
Okay, Luis. Good afternoon. I hope you are well along with your loved ones. My name is Martin Ueda, and the Rethinking the Challenge of Constitutional Democracy in the 21st Century conference will be held within the framework of the Shelter for Peace and Human Rights of the Faculty of Social Science of the University of Buenos Aires. In this event, we will have the opportunity to hear the valuable contribution of the two experienced speakers in the field. The conference will be broadcast on various digital platforms where the audience will be able to listen and ask questions. They will later be posed to the speakers. First, we will have the participation of Dr. Robert Paz, a distinguished jurist who served as Dean of the Yale Law School and currently holds the Sterling Professorship at that institution. He is also a member of the American Philosophical Society and the American Academy of Arts and Science. We will also have the participation of Luis David Fernández Zambrano, current professor and director of the Shelter for Peace and Human Rights Chair of the Universidad de Buenos Aires Faculty of Social Science, author of numerous books and articles related to the legal theory, constitutional law, labor law, and others. I would like to point out that Professor Robert Paz will have 20 or 25 minutes to present his lucid contribution on the subject. Professor Paz, you have the floor.
Thank you, Victor, and it's a pleasure to talk with you today. I'm going to be talking today about the relationship between the internet and democracy and trying to think about the question of what threats the internet poses to democracy. And when I think about that question, I want to frame it in terms of the unique threats that the internet poses to democracy. The world now is in the throes of a fundamental transition. We are moving from a world of analog information to a world of digital information. And we have developed through the internet a means of distributing digital information in vast quantities at the speed of light. And this has caused major transformations of our structures of communication. And so the first question that I want to think about with you a little is, in what ways is the structure of communication distinct from any past system of mass communication that humanity has ever had? Every form of mass communication we've experienced as a species has been analog information. And so now we're in the world of digital. And what difference does that make? I'm going to talk about three differences. The first is that digital information can be distributed over the internet with zero marginal information cost. That means the cost of my sending a message to you in Buenos Aires is just about the same as my sending a message to somebody across the street. My sending 10 million bits of information, the cost is just about the same as my sending 10 bits of information. So I can send information in innumerable quantities all over the world at virtually the speed of light. And this in turn produces three distinctions. The one is scale. The internet is a structure of communication that exists at a scale that we have never seen before in the history of humanity. Just to give you a simple measure of that, in the first quarter of 2023, Facebook had 3 billion users, 3 billion. There's not another media mass communication that has a scale like that. Second is virality. And by virality, I'm not talking about the amount of information. I'm talking about the speed by which information is transmitted. Information goes through the internet at lightning quickness, as distinct from, say, the spread of analog information, which has to be spread by word of mouth or by transmitting movie, celluloid, or by other forms. And the third difference is that the internet has created a public sphere which is for all practical reasons, for all practical purposes, international. So in the old days of analog information, we could speak about national public spheres. We could speak about the American musical theater. We could speak about French poetry. We could speak about German philosophy. But as information travels across the globe at the speed of light, these national spheres are disintegrating. And we are moving. We haven't achieved that yet because of national interference with the internet, but I think it's readily predictable within 50 years, we're going to have an international cosmopolitan public sphere. There's a fundamental difference in the way in which human beings have communicated. So the first difference is zero marginal information cost. The second difference I want to call your attention to is its integration with everyday life. So the internet has become part of the way we live our life because we access the internet through our phones, and everybody has a phone. So we use our phone to shop. We use our phones to navigate. We use our phones to find partners. We use our phones to navigate all the details of everyday life. And no other form of mass communication was integrated into the daily living of life the way the internet is. So there is a seamlessness in the way in which the mass structure of the internet and the living of everyday phenomenological life are connected. And this is unique. The third difference I want to point to is interactivity. All other forms of mass communication were distributed from a speaker to an audience. So a director made a film and we all watched the film. A newspaper publisher published a film and published a newspaper, and we would read it in bed on Sunday morning, etc. So we were passive as an audience. Much of the internet, not all of it, but much of the internet is interactive. So I use the internet like I'm talking to you to talk to each other. The social media platforms like X or like Facebook or like Truth Social have this property where people talk to each other. This is unique because it allows people to communicate to each other in ways that they never, ever communicated before. And this has had enormous number of consequences. So for one thing, because the previous forms of mass communications were speaker to audience, they all had gatekeepers. So there was the editor of a newspaper, there was the editor of a magazine, there was the movie studio that made the movie, and all of these were gatekeepers. They presided over what mass communications went out, and they warranted their authenticity. And that means that there were people who we trusted. If we wanted to know in the United States what the news really was, we would go to the newspaper of record that we really trusted. We would go to the New York Times. We would know where to go to trust what form of mass communication. But the internet, because it's interactive, has bypassed these gatekeepers. The internet distributes information through algorithms, but none of these algorithms vouch for the authenticity, the epistemological authenticity of information. And so what has happened is that the internet has created groups of people who talk to each other, and the audiences on the internet resemble less a group of people in a movie theater than they resemble a group of people at work who gather around the water cooler and are talking to each other. Another way to think about that question is that the forms of communication on the internet have the form of what we used to call gossip. People gossiping to each other on the internet. Now, there's a lot of anthropological work about the structure of gossip and gossip groups, but we tended to think about that as a pre-modern phenomenon because gossip groups spread through analog forms of information, and they didn't have the scale of the nation state. The nation state was produced, as you know from Benedict Anderson, from the creation of mass communications, which could reach a mass public, create a mass public opinion, and that corresponded to the mass creation of these imagined entities, nations. You couldn't have nations without forms of mass communication. But now what the internet has created, because of the interactivity, because of the zero marginal information cost, it's created gossip groups at the scale of the nation state. So people are talking to each other in very large groups that can affect national politics. And that means that the public, or I should say rather the people who are voting in democracies are now receiving information through communication structures that are analogous to gossip groups. And this has very important consequences. One is that epistemological authority in a gossip group doesn't refer to expertise outside the gossip group. It refers to people in the gossip group. So it warranted it true in a gossip group because everyone else thinks it's true. A second thing about a gossip group is that it always has ins and outs. You know who you gossip to. You gossip to people you trust, and you're always talking about people outside the gossip group. So gossip by itself creates a dynamic of insiders and outsiders. And think here about forms of polarization, which are analogous to the dynamics of gossip groups. All of this is a function of the interactivity of the internet, and it's reinforced by the fact that these gossip groups are at a national scale because of zero marginal information cost. And it's further reinforced by the fact that this is now integrated into everyday life because the internet has become integrated into everyday life. So these are three major ways in which the internet fundamentally differs from all other forms of mass communication in the history of humanity. Now, why are we looking at this? Because democracy itself depends upon forms of communication. Democracy, as I said, was created by forms of mass communication, which created the public sphere, which created the possibility of public opinion. And without public opinion, you couldn't have a democracy. Some of the best definitions of democracy are forms of government which are responsive to public opinion. And so we need to know what is the relationship of the internet into the creation of the public opinion, which is vital, which is the essence of what we call democracy. And I'm going to name 6 potential dangers that the internet could cause to the formation of that form of public opinion, which is necessary to a democracy. And the first of these I want to talk about is the loss of epistemological authority. So every stable society needs a form of stable epistemological authority. We need to know how to know what's true and what's false. And this is particularly the case for modern societies because under a Durkheimian division of labor, we have to trust each other to know what's true and not. And in particular, we have to trust experts. We don't know whether the bridge will sustain the traffic. We don't know whether our homes will be flooded by climate change. We don't know whether the vaccine will cure cancer. The only way we know these things is to have experts and to trust experts, right? So trust of epistemological authority, in particular of expertise, is essential to our society. And we know that the loss of epistemological authority can be fatal to society. So here's a simple example. When the printing press was invented in the 16th century, it caused a fundamental destabilization of Western Europe. So before the printing press, the church monopolized knowledge of how to get to heaven. It was, they forbade lay people from reading the Gospels. You could only know what was in the New Testament in the Gospels from your priest. Now that was, and the priest was therefore the church was the epistemological authority about how to achieve salvation. Along comes printing, and the printing means the distribution of Bibles in ways that everybody could read the Bibles. So now everyone could read the Gospels for themselves. And what happens? The epistemological authority of the church gets undermined, and we have what's called the Reformation, the emergence of Protestantism. And that destabilized Europe with 150 years of war, from the 40 Years of War to the Peasants' Rebellion in Germany, to the English Civil War, etc. Without a stable form of epistemological authority, you cannot have a stable social structure. So what has the internet done for us? It's done something similar to what the printing press did for Europe in the 16th century. It's distributed knowledge. So now we have, everybody can know everything. Everyone can just do a Google search and have more information than they know what to do with. In fact, the scarcity now is not information, it's attention. And so forms of the internet is designed to attract your attention with all kinds of bait and switch. But whatever information I want, I can get. I think it's information. But because there's a plethora of information, I don't know who to trust anymore. I don't know what information to trust. And this has created pervasive cynicism about the expertise, the epistemological expertise of experts and others. So if you go into your doctor's office now, you know, before you go into your doctor's office, you do your research on the internet, and then you start asking your doctor all sorts of questions like you know something about what you're talking about because you've done the research on the internet. I've seen signs in doctors' offices now saying your Google search is not the equivalent of my MD degree. So the balance of power, the balance of epistemological authority between doctors and patients shifted fundamentally. And if you want to see the political implications of that, just look at the backlash to the COVID vaccine in the United States or in Brazil, because now everybody and their brother thinks they're an expert about what cures COVID or what doesn't cure COVID. And if that's true, you can no longer run a society. We're going to have the same issue that Western Europe had during the Reformation. And as Hannah Arendt teaches us, we cannot run a democracy unless we're able to distinguish what's true and what's not true by way of facts. And the internet has sort of taken that away from us. And the true issue here, this is often theorized as misinformation, but the actual issue is not in misinformation. It's the loss of epistemological authority by which true information can be distinguished from false information. And that's a much more serious problem and much more difficult to remedy. It's not going to be remedied by having people who can flag truth or trusted advisors for what's true in the internet, because it's elephants all the way down. If you're going to distrust the internet source, you're going to distrust the flaggers, you're going to distrust the people who are telling you this is true. So this is a very deep problem. That's problem number one. Problem number two is the nature of a public. So if you look at sociologists in the 19th century, they distinguished between the public and the crowd or the mob. You might think here of sociologists like Gabriel Tarde, for example. So publics received their information from mass communications. They were masses of people who are all reading the newspaper and thinking about what they saw and discussing it with their friends. Their processes of thought happened in the space of analog information. Crowds, on the other hand, were groups of people who were in one place. And whenever you hear the metaphors by which we describe a crowd, it's the exact opposite of a public. Crowds are subject to contagion. Crowds are subject to frenzies. Emotions sweep through a crowd. We think of crowds as emotional, not as logical or system. Those of you who know Daniel Kahneman can say, crowds are system one thinking and the public is system two thinking. A democracy needs system two thinking. A democracy cannot work if the public is a crowd or a mob. And if you think about what the internet produces, it produces flash mobs. It doesn't produce publics. And that's because of the virality of the internet. That's because information spreads so quickly through gossip groups that people are not independent enough to process it the way they would in a public. And so in the absence of a public that thinks, democracies are in deep trouble. And what we need to do is think about ways of organizing the internet such that it produces structures of communication which are more closely allied to publics than to crowds. That's a second difficulty. A third difficulty concerns issues of scale. So the internet discloses information at a scale which is completely unprecedented. And that means that when the internet produces harms, it produces harms that we have to think of as stochastic. We have a remark, we have a statement, and the question is not did that statement cause harm, but did that statement said to 3 billion people create a likelihood of harm? Now, when we think about in terms of freedom of speech, it's very important to protect freedom of speech, and in particular, freedom of speech on the internet, because that's where information is distributed, the virtual public sphere in the modern life. But when we think about regulating speech, we think about particular speech acts causing particular harms. We ask, did this speech act present a clear and present danger of that harm? So particular causality, tight nexus of causality, of harm. But the large scale of the internet requires us to think about harm stochastically. What's the likelihood that this kind of speech act will cause harm? And we do not have, I can tell you, we do not have the doctrinal tools by which to distinguish statements which stochastically cause harm in any way that would do anything other than vastly overregulate speech. So this poses a great challenge to us in the regulation of the internet. A fourth danger that I want to mention concerns the definition of the public sphere itself. So every legal system that I know of, virtually every legal system, distinguishes between public speech and private speech. And we allow a great deal more falsity and harm to come from public speech, because public speech is how we form public opinion, than we do in private speech. If you're saying something privately to someone, we protect the dignity of the person from libel or from invasions of privacy or honor, various other forms of legal regulations. But in public, we tend to be much more tolerant of speech that causes that kind of harm. And the architecture of virtually every freedom of speech system that I know of depends upon this. And if you want to see the best example of that, is the news media. The news media are the example of the mass communication to the public to which we give special license. So what has the internet done? Because the internet is interactive, it's allowed any person to distribute information to the public in ways they could never do before. So we have no idea anymore about the distinction between speech delivered that's private, you know, I'm saying it to you, and speech delivered to the public. Any person could be a news reporter now. Any person could be a magazine. And we simply have no idea how to recast the foundations of this public-private distinction, which lays at the foundation of almost all free speech doctrine in almost every country. So that's a third danger. A fourth danger. Here's the fifth danger. It concerns cosmopolitanism. Why do we protect speech? Almost every country protects speech because it wants its government to be responsive to the domestic public opinion of the country. So we protect speech in the United States because we want our president to be responsive to our public opinion. But we don't want our president to be responsive to Russian public opinion. And you don't want your public opinion, you don't want your president in Argentina to be responsive to Brazilian public opinion. And yet the internet, because of zero marginal information costs, is becoming a cosmopolitan public sphere. And so what are the protections of speech that we're going to do in the internet? Because the whole distinction, the whole foundation of freedom of speech in almost every country is founded on the notion that we have a distinct national public sphere. These are disintegrating. And so we do not know how to reconstitute that. And we don't know how to reconstitute that. We don't know how to reconstitute our normative system for protecting freedom of speech. Huge issue. And then the last thread in the last 4 minutes that I have, I'm going to be talking about the governance of speech on the internet, and that is the distinction between AI and law. So the internet exists at a huge scale. Just to give you now an example, in the first quarter of 2022, Facebook took down 152 million pieces of content. 152 million pieces of content in 3 months. And of those 152 million, there were 2.5 million appeals in 3 months. There is not a human institution that can function at that scale. No court can function at that scale. No human institution processes cases at 200 million in 4 months. It just doesn't happen. So that means that content moderation on the internet happens through AI, through artificial intelligence. But that means that our public sphere is being governed by AI. Now, why is it legitimate to govern it through AI? Law is a legitimate form of governing public opinion and governing speech. It's taken us centuries to construct legal doctrine and principles that makes legal government of speech legitimate. We have no reason to trust AI. How can we trust AI? And the first thing to notice about that is AI is not law, and it can never be law. When a judge makes law, he makes law as a participant in the community who are governed by the law made by the judge. That's the warrant for the judge's opinion. And think here of Kant's third critique, the critique of judgment. AI can never be a participant in the community. The most that AI can do is to give us a factual report of what other people think. But when we ask people to make independent judgments in law, we never ask them what other people think. In the United States, for example, it would be improper for a jury to determine what a reasonable person would do by taking a poll. They have to make their own independent judgment of what a reasonable person does. That's precisely what AI can never do. So there's a gap between AI, which in the end is just a set of regressions, and law. And we need to find ways of closing that gap. And what I'm going to suggest to you is these are going to turn on ways of politically legitimating AI. The interesting thing about AI is that it has to be trained. And so that training is an avenue in for legitimation. If we think about who is going to be training the AI, how are they going to be politically representative? How are they going to have feedback loops to know that their training is taking place? That will be, I predict, in the long run, the way in which we solve this problem, but we have to start thinking about it now. So I've given you 6 dangers. I've given you 3 ways in which the internet has differed, and all of them, I think, are pretty severe. And I'll stop there.
Professor Pos, thank you very much for your presentation. Professor Luis David Fernández, you have the floor.
That's right. First of all, I would like to thank my illustrious friends and colleague Robert Pos for accepting our invitation and honoring and with his wise and proposal during the opportunity. The hoping that it will be the preamble to future academic collaboration. The primary purpose of my presentation lies in the need to address in an interdisciplinary manner the main challenge the facing constitutional democracies in the new millennium, considering the relevance of certain common variables in a large part of the countries in America and Europe. In this context, I wish to divide my argument into several nuclei of the thought that we ran through the entire ideological constitution of my presentation that would be easily divisible as the minutes pass. Since ancient times, philosophical has played preeminent roles in the construction of existential assumptions that allow us to extend phenomena inherent to social culture and historical reality. Since ancient Greece, the various thinkers have dedicated mental effort to interpret reality and through reason propose solutions to human challenges in the short, medium, and long term. It is important to highlight that the fundamental categories for the written political and legal functioning, including the constitutional one, have their roots in the Eurocentric history, very particularly in Greece of the 5th. However, over time, these categories have evolved to do human intellectual activity and various historical political phenomena, such as war, colonization, and poor tries that have electric human dignity. Philosophical has laid the conceptual foundation for the separation of the powers, a fundamental principle in the development of the constitutional democracies. Thinkers such as Machiavelli, Thomas Aquinas, and Locke contributed significantly to this process, establishing in the ideological terrain that later crystallized into political power structure. During the Enlightenment, these philosophical bases were expressed in constitutional legal bodies, such as the Constitution of Cadiz of 1018-12, who influenced in the configuration of the new Latin American republics. However, it is important to recognize that despite conceptual advances, reality often operates in a manner divergent or from constitutional principle, which poses additional challenge for the effective application of democratic rights and guarantees in the current context. Marked by historical events such as world wars, the respect for human rights and environmental protection have become central themes in constitutional analysis, pointing out the importance of continuous attention to the preservation of the global public. In the summary, the philosophical analysis of the constitutional problems in contemporary democracies leads us to understand the complexity of current challenges and the needs to address them from an interdisciplinary perspective, considering both in the fundamental principles and the conceptual realities that influence their effective application. In summary, the analysis of exogenous conditions for democratic and development forces has to look beyond national borders and consider the complex network of factors that influence the evolution of constitutional democracies, from economic globalization to urban dynamics, social diversity, and international European. Each element plays a crucial role in shaping the contemporary democratic landscape. Only through a holistic and multidisciplinary approach can we address the challenges and take advantage of the opportunity present in this new global context. In the complex fabric of the constitutional democracies, the re-evaluation to this root philosophical principle became imperative in view of contemporary challenges. The notions of the equality fundamental to the contextual structure of these democracies has been the subject of instant intellectual and academic scrutiny. Evidence in my recent exchange with distinguished experts such as renowned Roberto Gargarella. The central question lies in the relationship between equality and equality, and how this interaction translate into global social legal reality. I argue that equality, far from being mere counterpoint to equality, can offer more robust and contextualized perspective to address the complex challenges facing our contemporary society. The primacy of reality emerges as a fundamental concept in the analysis by considering equality as a phenomenon rooted in the socioeconomics and political reality. We are to understand in its complexity and the scope. The perspective allows us to go beyond simplistic and binary approach and invites us to explore the structural roots of equality in the social and legal system. The complexity of the global social legal reality requires then a profound evaluation of the conceptual categories. It is crucial to recognize that traditional philosophical principles cannot be applied statically of the university, but must be adopted, the contextualities to the changing dynamics of our contemporary society. The Rights-UBA does not necessarily imply the abolition of the notion of the equality, but rather in the reconceptualization in more dynamics and free terms. Divide understand equality as goal to be achieved through the mitigation of the structure equality. We can develop more effective and fair approach to promote inclusion and equity in our democracies. Ultimately, in realization of philosophical principles in constitutional democracy represent a major intellectuality and technical challenge. However, it is a challenge that we must embrace with determination, and humanity recognize the need to adapt our theoretical conception to the complexity and diversity of contemporary reality. In the landscape of modern democracies, ideological diversity emerged as a fundamental pillar for the construction of inclusive, equitable society. In this sense, it is crucial to emphasize that equality cannot be understood in a static or uniform way, but must be evaluated in the type of the risk, tapestry of perspective, values, and the belief that characteristics of contemporary society. This approach supports vast the scholarship of eminent experts such as Martin and Beverly McClain, challenges traditional conception of equality as an abstract, one-dimensional principle. Equality at its core is intrinsically intertwined with equality, and recognizing this complex relationship is essential for forging policy and practice that promote inclusion and social justice. The uniform application of egalitarian principle can lead to a scenario where individual difference and conceptual particularities are ignored or even marginalized. It is therefore essential to adopt a more nuanced approach that celebrates and values diversity as a bilateral resource to social cohesion and democratic progress. But embracing ideological diversity as an asset will not only enrich on the collectivity and understanding of the world, but also broaden the spectrum of possible solutions to the challenges we face. The plurality of perspectives enables to address social, cultural, and political problems from multiple angles, to fostering creativity, innovation, and resilience in our democracies. Furthermore, the promotion of genuine and respectful dialogue between different ideological visions is essential for the strength, gearing social cohesion and consolidating democracy. This dialogue not only allows us to find points for convergence and big consensus, but also challenges us to confront our own assumptions and prejudices, thus fostering greater empathy and mutual understanding. Ultimately, it is through this active commitment to ideological diversity that we can aspire to the more just, inclusive, and promising future for the citizens of the world. by recognizing and celebrating all our differences, not as insurmountable barriers, but as opportunities for growth and collaboration. It laid foundation for a truly inclusive and resilient democracy today for the new millennium in the future humanity. Thank you very much. I am ready for the question. Sorry. Hello, Martin. What happened?
Hi, sorry. Professor Luis David, thank you very much for your presentation. Now, during the course of your presentation, we have received some questions from the students who are watching this lead broadcast. I will mention the following to hear your opinions. First, what is the relationship between populist political polarization and the weakening of constitutional democracies? How can we combat this phenomenal and strengthen civilized public debate? Second, what roles does civic education play in the formation of responsible and committed citizens to democracy? How can we strengthen civic education in schools and in society as a whole? Professor Robert Paz and Luis David Fernández, you have the floor.
So I'll start, Luis. So 2 questions. One is, what's the relationship of populist polarization and democracy? And the second question, just to make sure I've got the questions, was what's the role of civic education? Have I got those 2 questions correctly?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So on the question of polarization, there's many different conceptions of politics and what we mean when we say people are contesting in politics. I want to put 2 on the table. One is from the German philosopher Carl Schmitt. And Carl Schmitt says, what is the essential political distinction between friend and enemy? So when you are existentially threatened, who are your friends and who is going to die with you in an existential conflict? That's the political distinction. Who is your friend and who's your enemy? And politics is akin to war. So he imagines the scene of the globe that's at war as a scene of a political relationship between independent nations. Chantal Mouffe, who I think writes in Argentina, has said, well, we need a different conception of politics. What we need is a conception of politics in which people are not antagonistic, friends and enemies, but agonistic. So in politics, people differ, but they don't want to kill each other. And that means that they agree that there's something more important than winning. That is to say, staying in a peaceful relationship with each other where they're both alive. That requires a political relationship of the kind that Chantal Mouffe describes, which is, the kind that any nation state would have. We don't want civil war in a nation state. We would view that as the breakdown of politics. It requires that we have something in common with our opponents, which is greater than our difference with our opponents. Otherwise, it degenerates into a Schmittian friends and enemies. And so the question of polarization is the question of what do we have in common that's greater than our disagreements? And what we're seeing in polarizations is that it's moving toward a Schmittian sense of civil war. In my country in 2016, there was a famous essay called the Flight 93 election. And we saw someone from the conservative right wing say, this is the Flight 93 election. That was the flight that the hijackers took over. And the sentence was, you have to seize the cockpit or you die. That is a Schmittian conception of politics. It leads right to civil war. And what it suggests is that we have less and less in common with our opponents. And polarization leads to the death of a democracy, unless we can rediscover what we have in common that will allow politics in the Muffian sense to continue. Now that leads to the second question, which is civic education. Often when people say, what do we have in common? They imagine civic education. And there's a very large literature, at least in the United States, about democratic education. It turns out you can't have a democracy unless people are educated into the virtues of a democracy. That is to say, toleration of the other, respect for the other, that we have something in common, the nation state, which is larger than our differences, etc. Those are all socialized into persons, whether that's through formal education or through primary institutions of socialization like the family. That's all important. You couldn't have a democracy without it. What I was suggesting in my talk about the internet is that our experience of the other is formed by many things other than education. It's formed by, for example, our everyday experiences with the internet, which, if I was correct to say, is determined by gossip groups where there is no other. There's an insider and there's an outsider. Then we lose the virtues of democratic education because of our everyday experience using Facebook or X or whatever it is that we use. And we have to think about ways to counteract that. So civic education is certainly important, but it may not be sufficient.
Okay, thank you very much. Professor Luis David?
That's right. Thank you very much. The relationship between populism and political polarization and the weakening of constitutional democracies is a complex dynamic rooted in the interaction on the socio-economic, cultural, and institutional factors. Populism, characterized by the simplification of complex issues and the premise of weeks of emotional solution, tends to capitalize of the frustration and anxieties of the populace. This phenomenon can lead to political polarization by dividing society into antagonistic camps, to eroding the consensus necessary for the effective functioning of democracy's institution. Political polarization, in turn, fuels populism by fostering confrontation over constructive dialogue, resulting in a fragmentation of the political body and a loss of confidence in democratic institutions. The polarized environment creates fertile ground for populist leaders who exploit exiting divisions to consolidate their power and weaken institutional checks and balances. The weakening of constitutional democracies occur when populist leaders were in power, weaken democratic norms, undermine the separation of power, and weaken the check and balances that ensure accountability and protect individual rights. This gradual weakening of democratic institutions undermines the health of democracy can and eventually lead to authoritarian or even totalitarian forms of government. To combat this phenomenon and strengthen civilized public debate, it is crucial to promote democratic literacy and informed civic participation. This involves fostering a political culture that values diversity of opinions and mutual respect, as well as promoting critical media literacy and digital literacy to empower citizens to discern between factual information and misinformation. Moreover, it's essential to strengthen democratic institutions and mechanisms of checks and balances, ensuring the independence of the judiciary, strengthening transparency and accountability, and protecting fundamental civil and political rights. Additionally, promoting activities, citizen participation, and fostering civic engagement can counter political apathy and strengthen the legitimacy of democratic institutions. Ultimately, strengthening constitutional democracies requires us collective effort involving citizen political leaders, educational institutions, media, and civil society to cultivate and robust democratic culture resilient to the threats of populism and political polarization. Civic education plays a pivotal role in shaping responsible and democratic committed citizens by providing them with the knowledge, skill, and values necessary to engage activity and effectivity in the civic and political life of their community and nation. In a broader sense, this civic education contributes to the formation of informed, critic, and ethical individuals capable of understanding and appreciating the fundamental principle of democracy, as well as exercising their rights and responsibility. Securing civic education is a school in a school, please, and in society and large is essential for cultivating an engaged and empowered citizenship. This involves integrating civic education cross-curricularly into school curricula, from primary education to higher education, to ensure that students acquire a solid understanding of democratic principles, political process, and civil rights. Furthermore, it is important to promote participatory and action-oriented pedagogical approach that involve students in the practical activities, such as debates, mocks, elections, and community projects, allowing them to apply their knowledge in real-world context and develop critical thinking, the problem-solving, and in collaboration skills. And in society is large. Initiatives to promote civic education should reach a diverse and broad audience. The using media, the digital technological, and community engagement spaces to disseminate information about civil rights, electoral process, and public interest issues. That's right for this moment.
Thank you very much, Luis. Thank you very much, Professor Post. How have new technologies such as social networks and artificial intelligence impact the functioning of constitutional democracies? What new challenges and opportunities do these technologies present for democracy? What role can social movements and civil society play in defending democracy? How can we encourage citizen participation in political and social life? Professor Post, past Professor Luis David, your opinions?
The short answer is we have no idea how AI is going to affect democracy. It is such a massive innovation, and we're just beginning to sense its many, many different implications. So I mentioned in my talk one, that is to say AI is going to be governing our means of communication. So we need to find ways to make AI continuous with law, since it's making law for us, and we don't know how to do that. So that's one very simple one. A second one is that AI is going to further amplify our epistemological crisis. We don't know what's true and what's invented by AI. We don't know what's a true picture or what's a deep fake. We don't know what's a real video and what AI is constructed. And I don't know, do you study in Buenos Aires postmodernism? You know, postmodernism, you might say, is a movement in the humanities in which we say, well, there is no natural world, there's only a constructed world. And that can be quite a dystopian possibility. AI creates, you know, the reality of postmodernism. We have no idea what's real and what's not. We have no idea what's natural and what's not. We will be living very shortly, I would say 5-10 years, in a world that's constructed for us by AI. And that is going to be phenomenally disorienting. Because our baseline, we have baselines of what's true, what's false, what's real, what's not, what's natural, what's not. AI is going to disrupt all of those. A third is AI is going to destroy time and space. So, you know, now I am talking to you in Buenos Aires. I'm talking to you from thousands of miles away. And someone 100 years ago would have thought that that's impossible. Think of the miracle of talking to someone thousands of miles away. AI, within 10 years, you'll put on a headset and you will be cooking with somebody in Buenos Aires. You'll be in three-dimensional space, building, interacting, making things across the world with partners. You will be traveling in Paris without ever having been in Paris. And so the idea of living in a virtual world, as opposed to, you know, just talking the way we're talking now, or just speaking the way we're speaking now, but living in a virtual world, this is going to create mind-boggling problems of how we relate to each other, what our norms are. So in the United States, I am the co-reporter for something called the Restatement of Law for Defamation and Privacy. And I thought that the last restatement of law was written by a great legal scholar named William Prosser in 1977. And my job really was to update it for the world of the internet. And I went to Facebook and I saw them making the metaverse, in which they were, you know, putting on these headsets, and somebody in Palo Alto would be working with somebody in Bangladesh to learn how to bake bread, and they'd be interacting with each other. And I realized that the issue of what's private and what's public in the virtual world is going to be an enormous issue in 5-10 years. And I hadn't a clue how to begin to think about that. We don't have the norms about how to think about that. We don't have the, we simply don't know how to make it. And it's going to be changing just about everything in your life. It's going to be changing the idea of professionalism. It's going to be changing the idea of education. Just everything, everything is going to be changing. You know, do we want a president or do we want AI? The number of questions you can ask are infinite, and they're all troubling, and most of them have a semblance of reality about it. So, I mean, I can't give an answer, but I can tell you it's going to be real, and we need to be alert about it. You ask how civil society can defend. Civil society has to be alert to these differences, and they have to be active, because what's going to happen is AI is going to be appropriated by profit-making entities. It's going to be appropriated in terms of capitalism. It's going to be appropriated by government entities, and they will use these to the disadvantage of people. And when we think of who's going to defend people, it's going to be civil society. And why do we say that? Is because civil society will define it as people getting together to express their own interests democratically, and not being merely consumers, but being active citizens defending this or that about their lives. So if people want to be active in regulating AI, they have to be active in civil society. Otherwise, it'll be too late, and it'll be appropriated by, you know, mega corporations. It'll be appropriated by the government, and the circumstances will have changed so greatly that civil society won't be able to get a toehold to get back to ordinary values and norms. And so it's going to be a very crisis-filled situation, and the hope we have is civil society.
Thank you very much. Luis, ¿deseas agregar algo?
That's right. Why not? One moment, please. New technologies such as social media and artificial intelligence have profoundly impacted in the functioning of constitutional democracies, presenting both challenges and opportunities. On one hand, these technologies have democratic access to information and facilitated citizen participation by the providing platform for idea section and political mobilization. However, they have also posed new challenges, including the proliferation of misinformation, manipulation of public opinion, and erosion of online privacy and security. The social media platform has amplified citizen voices and enabled the formation of online communities, enhancing citizen ability to organize advocate for their interests. Nevertheless, they have also been used to disseminate false information and polarize public discourse, undermining the quality of democratic debate and fostering social fragmentation. Artificial intelligence, on the other hand, they have introduced new data analysis methods and content personalization, leading to increased audience segmentation and the creation of information bubbles. This can limit citizens' exposure to diverse perspectives and hinder dialogue among different groups, undermining social cohesion and democratic deliberation. In this regard, new technologies pose significant challenges to democracy, but also the opportunity to secure it. For instance, artificial intelligence can be used to detect and combat misinformation, while social media platforms can be regulated to promote transparency and accountability online. Ultimately, the challenge lies in the striking a balance between leveraging the opportunities these technologies offer to bolster democracies while mitigating their detrimental effect. Role of social movements and civil society in democratic defense. Social movements and civil society play a crucial role in the defending democracy by acting and counterweights to establish power in the promoting citizen participation in political and social life. This actor can mobilize citizens, they exert pressure on governments and institutions, and defend fundamental rights and freedoms. The social movements often emerge in response to perceived injustice or lack of political representations and can play significant roles in the promoting accountability and social inclusion. For example, the movement like the civil rights movement in the United States or the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong have been catalysts for political and social change. The civil society, on the other hand, they consist of a diverse range of the non-governmental organization and group representation various societal interests and concerns. This organization can play an essential role in monitoring governments, promoting transparency and citizen participation, and advocating for human rights and civil liberties. To foster citizen participation in political and social life is crucial for the create spaces for the open dialogue and collaboration between the citizen and institution. This may involve promoting mechanisms for the citizen participation, such as public constitutions and participation bodies, as well as strengthening civil society and supporting social movements for social justice and democracy in this new millennium for humanity in this planet. That's right.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you, Professor Post. Sorry. Thank you both for your participation. We close the conference rethinking the challenge of constitutional democracy in the 21st century. We invite you to continue participating in the activities of the Shelter for Peace and Human Rights Chair. See you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's right.
That's right.
That was great, Luis. You were great.
One moment, please. Please. Dear friends and colleagues, Robert Post, as we conclude our conference, I want to extend the heartfelt gratitude for your invaluable participation. Your insight, the expertise have profoundly enriched and dialogue the offerings, the unique and Hellenic perspective. I also want to apologize for any imperfection in my pronunciation during an interaction. Unavoidable circumstances may have affected my ability to express myself with the same fluency and precision as yours. Nevertheless, I'm greatly appreciate for understanding and patience in this regard. Looking ahead, I would like to express my aspiration to visit the Yale University at some point. It would be an honor to have the opportunity to share ideas and reflections with distinguished scholars like yourself, Martin Ueda, and moderator and other colleagues in the University of Buenos Aires. They may our share experiences continuing to inspire and guide us on our journey towards the greater understanding and collaboration in the future for the humanity and the planet academic today in the new century. With warm regards, my friends.
Thank you, Luis. It was a pleasure to hear you and your eloquence, and I can see that your students are in very good hands.
Thank you. Thank you very much.